for those on our side of the continent, on the world, and good morning to our other participants from the rest of the world. I want to welcome you this afternoon to our Africa Dialogue series this year. This is the fourth one on human capital development, climate, energy, and food systems. Let me introduce myself. My name is Joanne Kagwanja. I'm the Chief of Agriculture and Business Enabling Environment at ECA. I also coordinate the Africa Land Policy Center. A very good welcome. We have very distinguished speakers and panelists in this session, an important one given the times that we are in, where we have seen a lot of climate and other shocks, especially to our food systems, but also to recognize the importance of human capital development and the nexus of climate and energy to the food systems. So this afternoon, I'm very, very pleased to welcome first, in the first session, some welcoming remarks and opening remarks, and then we'll be moving on to a panel. In the first session, we'll be hearing some opening remarks from Mrs. Cristina Duarte, the Undersecretary General and Special Advisor on Africa. We are very pleased to have her with us. We'll also be hearing some opening remarks from Dr. Vera Songwe, the Undersecretary General and Executive Secretary of the UNECA, who will be represented this afternoon, our time, morning, your time, by the Deputy Executive Secretary, Dr. Hanan Morsi. We'll also be hearing some opening remarks from Mrs. Nados Bekele Thomas, the CEO of Auda NEPAD. Very pleased to have her as she begins her term over at Auda NEPAD. So without further ado, let me move over to the welcoming remarks by Mrs. Cristina Duarte. Thank you. Would you kindly unmute yourself, please?
Sorry. Good morning. Good morning. I have unmute, but then you mute again. Sorry, I have unmute
no,
and then
we can hear you. Yes.
Now you can hear me?
Yes, we can.
Very well. So good morning. Good morning from New York. Thank you very much for being with us today, especially the moderator, Joan. As you know, we have been delivering the Africa Dialogue series since the beginning of May, trying to transform the month of May in New York at the Secretariat as the African month. This year we partner with very important entities in the food systems value chain, and I believe that so far I believe we need to be proud of what has been delivered or what we delivered together, Africa Dialogue Series is a flagship product of OSA, and in the last couple of years, we are trying to transform the Africa Dialogue Series in a platform of African voices in the New York stage. So, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, Excellencies. Distinguished panelists, ladies and gentlemen, all protocols observed. On behalf of all the co-organizers, I'm pleased to welcome you all to this fourth and last webinar of the Africa Dialogue Series 2022 on the theme Human Capital Development, Climate, Energy, and Food Systems. In the previous webinar, it has already been noted that the food crisis that Africa is experiencing has been amplified to some extent by external factors. First, COVID-19, and most recently, war in Ukraine. And both disrupted global supply chains. But we cannot ignore that beyond the impact of these factors, climate change is a looming threat to Africa's food security and nutrition. The impact of climate change is being felt more and more frequently across the various African sub-regions through an increase in disaster events such as droughts in the Horn of Africa and Sahel, floods in Central, Eastern, and Southern Africa, and hurricanes in Southern Africa. And this is a risk that will not disappear unless collective action under a mutual accountability framework is taken as a matter of urgency. In order to overcome this challenge, we must accelerate the structural transformation of African economies in a way that reduces their vulnerabilities to external shocks and factors. I believe it's time for Africa to adopt in a strong way a from within approach. Let's put in our minds this simple expression, from within. In the case of climate change and environmental degradation, two main types of measures need to be taken. First, it is critical to develop resilient agriculture systems with technologies and practices that build on agroecological knowledge. And energy is a major player here. Energy is essential to power agriculture production, and to increase productivity by connecting the production, the processing, and the preservation of food. It is also an excellent way to support the smallholders to scale up innovation and alternative practices. Connecting renewable energy investments with the food system's value chain will pave the way for integrated approach for energy strategies and agriculture policies anchored on water, energy, and food nexus. In turn, this will allow us to leverage the potential of digitization to scale up climate-smart agriculture measures that would, at the same time, fight land degradation and strengthen the resilience of smallholder farmers. Second, we need to have in place supporting systems that are functional and can help cushion the effects of change and to facilitate the transformation of systems. This entails primarily focus on human capital development. With a human capital index score of 0.40, Africa is at 40% of its potential. The GDP per worker could be 2.5 times higher if every African citizen had the possibility to complete their education and had full health coverage. Imagine the impact of such an increase on Africa's agriculture. So human capital, research, and traditional knowledge can be instrumental in developing nutritious, health, and climate-resilient food systems. For that, investments and prioritization are critical. I'm very hopeful for Africa since we are not starting from scratch. We should base our actions along the strategies defined in the 2030 Agenda, Agenda 2063, the Malabo Declaration, and of course, the outcome of the UN Food System Summit last year. It is time to build forward better and establish a prosperous Africa in which no one is left behind. I trust that today's webinar will provide us with an opportunity to identify actionable recommendations to leverage the climate, energy, food nexus. Thank you very much, and back to you, Joanne.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ms. Duarte, on those inspiring words, but above all, the context, reminding us of our commitments that we just made last year in the Food System Summit and the need for us to look for actionable areas of work. Allow me now to introduce, on behalf of Dr. Songwe, our Deputy Executive Secretary here at ECA, Dr. Hanan Mosi, to make opening remarks. Thank you.
Hello, thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. Pleasure to be with you. Distinguished partners, colleagues, participants, all protocol observed. Allow me first and foremost to commend the partnership between the African Union and the United Nations, especially in the context of this Africa dialogue series. Indeed, the theme of today's discussion on building resilience in nutrition and accelerating human capital and socioeconomic development is of particular relevance, especially in the context of widening divergence in recoveries from the COVID-19 pandemic, renewed supply chain disruptions, weak productive capacity and resilience of production systems, and sadly worsening socioeconomic stress levels amid persistent global shocks. The urgent need for African countries to build resilience in nutrition with a view to accelerating Africa's human capital and socioeconomic development has never been more evident than now. Achieving resilience to address the continent's sustainable transformation challenges will require a multi-stakeholder approach. Therefore, I will today be discussing the importance of adopting an integrated and cohesive approach in support of an inclusive and sustainable recovery for African countries. I will also highlight some areas of intervention for reducing vulnerabilities and achieving better results in addressing critical issues the continent is facing in relation to food systems, health, infrastructure, education, climate action, and resource mobilization. Africa needs to build resilience against a number of threats and future shocks, including macroeconomic ones, disease outbreaks, conflicts, rising food prices, energy price volatility, tightening financial conditions, and climate change. We already know that although the continent has contributed the least to climate change, it's really bearing the brunt of its consequences. We've seen from devastating droughts in Southern Africa and West Africa to cyclones and intense flooding in East Africa. Extreme weather is putting millions of Africans at risk of food and nutrition insecurity. Climate change is predicted to reduce the income of people in the bottom 40% by more than 8% by 2030, further constraining our ability to respond to climate shocks and adapt to climate change. Moreover, if we look at this also in the context of what we've seen as a consequence of COVID-19 pandemic has disrupted economic and livelihood activities in service sectors such as tourism, remittances, commodity exports, and value chains. The pandemic sadly reversed more than 2 decades of hard-won gains in poverty reduction, increasing the number of newly poor in Africa by 55 million and pushing 39 million into extreme poverty. On top of that all, between 30 and 35 million formal jobs are at risk of reductions in wage and working hours because of reduced demand and lockdowns that we've seen. Unfortunately, the number of food insecure people on the continent has increased. Almost 1 in 5 Africans go hungry every day. The number of hungry on the continent reached 282 million in 2020 and continues to rise. Currently, Africa is not on track to meet the Sustainable Development Goal number 2, to end hunger and ensure access by all people to safe, nutritious, and sufficient food all year round, and to end all forms of malnutrition. The non-poor with consumption level of 10% above the $1.9 poverty line are likely to even fall into poverty because of the pandemic. A very small consumption volatility can be enough to push more millions of Africans into further poverty. The current reality is that the pandemic exacerbated fiscal deficits and raised levels of debt, owing to increased spending by African countries to protect the most vulnerable. Perhaps even more alarming, the continent is facing a squeeze in domestic and external resources, while economic growth in both developed and developing countries are expected to decelerate in 2023. With regard to finance from the financing side or financing gap for Africa, the annual SDG expenditures are expected to rise by $154 billion annually due to the pandemic, and by an additional $285 billion for the next 5 years, just to ensure adequate response to COVID-19. At the same time, the rising financing costs have significant implication for Africa's ability to meet its sustainable development needs in critical areas such as infrastructure, which is estimated in terms of investment needs between 130 and 170 billion US dollars annually. Health is estimated about 66 billion US dollars. Education, the financing gap is estimated about 39 billion US dollars annually. Climate mitigation and adaptation requires investments of over 3 trillion by 2030 to finance implementation of nationally determined contribution. That amounts to 300 billion a year. On top of that all, we had the implication of the Russia-Ukraine conflict, which worsened the food security crisis in many African countries and exposed the underlying weaknesses in Africa's food systems, further underscoring the need to build resilience. With increasing fuel prices, disruptions in the supply chains of essential grains and fertilizers, Russia and Ukraine crisis has also impacted on access to markets, disrupting food systems and impacting trade balances, import bills, and current accounts. We've seen already fertilizer prices increasing by 66% year on year. And we have seen also this disruption in the fertilizer markets, further fueling food prices in the medium term. And moreover, there are expectations that this can impact yield by reducing yield by almost up to 50%, as some estimate. It's noteworthy that African economies lose equivalent of 3 to 16% of GDP annually due to malnutrition. Investment in nutrition is a smart economic investment, and every dollar invested in reducing chronic child undernutrition yields $16 return. The efforts toward realizing the call for the just transition and access to sustainable energy for all has not been spared by the Ukraine crisis. Crude and natural gas rose around 50% year on year, reaching the highest levels since 2008. There is imminent danger of the agriculture sector continuing to remain underfunded as Africa financing gap continues to widen significantly due to the implications of both the pandemic and the war in Ukraine. Distinguished colleagues, while the challenges are serious and daunting, solutions are available to turn the tide and secure a safe, fair, sustainable, and healthy food system for Africa. In concluding, I would like to call African governments to improve the enabling environment for the food system to thrive by increasing investments in agricultural public goods, fostering regional integration, supporting smallholders to benefit from digital revolution, and developing innovative financing instruments. Moreover, global financial inclusion is key to Africa's future. Global partners need to improve the continent's access to concessional financing, including through the recapitalization of multilateral development banks, reforms to the global financial architecture to be more agile and responsive to the financing needs of low-income countries and vulnerable middle-income countries. Finally, Africa needs to leverage regional integration and appropriate vehicles to channel climate financing. These measures could do much to transform African agriculture, increase food security, and reduce extreme poverty, boosting shared prosperity in the region. Thank you for your attention. I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Dr. Morsi, for the leadership shown, if I might say so myself, by ECA in partnership with the Africa Union Commission and UNADEPAD. And we're going to be hearing from the CEO of UNADEPAD, Mrs. Nados Bekele Thomas, right now to get the perspective of UNADEPAD as we move towards discussions and the panel. Thank you very much for your intervention. And welcome, Mrs. Nados Bekele Thomas.
My dear sisters, Mrs. Amina Mohammed, Deputy Secretary General of the United Nations, Ms. Christina Duarte, USG and Special Advisor on Africa, Ms. Vera Songwe, USG and Executive Secretary of the UNECA, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. I am most honored to participate in the 22 edition of the Africa Dialogue Series. Indeed, the ADS has proven to be a relevant platform for knowledge incubation and exchange, and in line with the main theme of the 35th Ordinary Session of the Assembly of the African Union on strengthening resilience in nutrition and food security on the African continent. The international webinar on human capital development, climate, energy, and food systems is aptly crafted to allow me to briefly share thoughts on the need for a consolidated African food security and nutrition program that is well-resourced to tackle Africa's food challenges and food shortages. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, while Africa is yet to fully recover from the socioeconomic repercussions which came out of the ongoing global pandemic of COVID-19, the current Russia-Ukraine conflict does not only land another major setback to the global economy, but also to the African continent. Since the start of the conflict, global wheat, sunflower, and crude oil prices have soared to previously unheard of heights, which, if continues, will pull back Africa into increased poverty, wiping away some of the steady gains made by the African continent to overcome challenges, strengthen our economies, and build strong institutions that will advance democratic principles. The increased extent and intensity of hunger and malnutrition in Africa, particularly among women and children and vulnerable groups, is a story we know. On the other hand, we also recognize the numerous successes undertaken by African governments to tackle hunger and malnutrition. However, the imperative and urgency to drive change that will enable communities to realize zero hunger for their population by 2025 cannot be overemphasized. The looming food crisis in Africa will only amplify the apparent urgency for policy and investment choices to be made for increased access to nutritious food and addressing structural weaknesses and vulnerability, including poverty and inequality, which are part of the problem blocking access to nutritious diets for all. There is an urgent need for an African Union-led initiative to support member states respond to this looming food and nutrition insecurity in Africa. Whilst we also embrace the UN Food System Summit momentum, UNADEPAD places emphasis on the urgent need for policy and investment choices that will transform local capacities and build resilient and inclusive food systems. These choices must be made and requires a consolidated African food security and nutrition program. In this regard, our NEPAD's food security and nutrition program is providing the continental programmatic scope and tool to foster basic conditions to address food and nutrition challenges. And we wholeheartedly invite the United Nations system, particularly the Rome-based UN agencies, to support the Auda NEPAD program of food systems. The program is designed to empower systemic local ownership and responsibility. Therefore, all initiatives, including bilateral and multilateral collaborations on building resilient and inclusive food systems, must be integral to existing national structures and plans, beginning with national development plans of African governments. At the regional and continental level, the Comprehensive Africa Agriculture Development Program, the CAADP, Malabo Declaration, the Agenda 2063, and other sector plans such as climate change, healthcare, and education plans should remain the frameworks within which food security and nutrition should be pursued. The program will also ensure that a mechanism to mobilize and enable community participation in agricultural value chains are in place. Frontline and grassroots players and stakeholders through technology will require information support and training, access to appropriate forms of investment capital, facilitation and support on aspects such as standards, packaging, and marketing will also be pivotal towards the food systems value chain. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, as the new CEO of Auda NEPAD, my focus this year will be working towards the full operationalization of the Auda NEPAD Development Fund as directed by the 35th African Union Summit. This flagship funding instrument aims to expand resource mobilization efforts and innovative financing mechanisms by developing and managing flexible fund models to increase sustainable development resources for Africa's most pressing priorities. It is an opportunity to use this basket fund as an alternative resource mobilization tool to mobilize funds towards addressing Africa's looming food and nutrition crisis. Furthermore, I'll be launching a new initiative that will be targeted at Africa's young professionals to advance Agenda 2063 and other Auda NEPAD's flagship and priority programs. The initiative called Auda NEPAD Technical Advisory Scheme for Young Professionals will be focused on technical and professional capacity mobilization of Africa's young professions within the continent and the diaspora for Africa's public sector development and also implementation of public sector programs. This scheme will ensure that the dynamism and technical know-how of the continent's youth are harnessed, cushioned by proactive and vibrant private sector engagement strategy. These and other Auda NEPAD programs and projects will be made to be impactful. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, as I conclude, let me point out one issue of critical importance in our collective efforts to support economic growth and development initiatives in Africa. This is the issue of coordination. Where efforts are fragmented, even well-intended programs end up less effective, very low value for money, and often piecemeal in content, and therefore simply unsustainable. It is my wish that as we deliberate further, the panelists and open discussion will examine the issue of coordination and systems approach, which also recognizes and enables practical solutions not only on human capital development or on climate or energy or food systems, but in an integrated manner, addressing solutions that cut across building the linkages, interdependencies in a very coordinated manner. Indeed, these are unprecedented times for the African continent, And it is my fervent hope that the thematic outputs emanating from the month-long Africa Dialogue series will strategically allow our institutions to refocus our work towards addressing the human capital development, climate, energy, and food system linkages. Thank you, and I wish you all fruitful deliberations.
Well, thank you, Ms. Nados Bekele Thomas, CEO of AUDA NEPAD. We welcome your leadership as you begin at AUDA NEPAD, and above all, look forward to some of those initiatives that you've highlighted, particularly those targeted at the youth. At this point, I would like to just highlight some of what we've had, even as I move to the panel that we have this morning, a very distinguished panel of different perspectives from areas and stakeholder groups that we've had, whether we are talking private sector and other institutions who will be making contributions this morning. So we've had it's a high cost. It's a high cost to do nothing. The cost of hunger and malnutrition, the cost that pertains to our high import bill, the lost opportunities to develop the food and agricultural systems and harness the linkages that energy and addressing climate change brings to create jobs and to innovate. This is a cost that we need to address in the context of looking for solutions. And we've had from our distinguished speakers the importance of building resilience in the agricultural systems and looking again at those that nexus, bringing in energy, water, food, and addressing climate change and using climate change as a driver actually to increase agricultural production. The issue of enabling the environment for involvement and for private sector to increase financing, digitization, and innovations have been highlighted. So is the importance of looking at it in a coordinated and integrated, consolidated manner. Not to forget, of course, that building capacities, our human capital development is at the core of all of this. So I'm going to be welcoming the panel that is going to be bringing some different perspectives. But before I do that, I also want to welcome everyone to post questions in the chat. I have very able persons who are going to be looking at the chat to highlight these questions. At this point, you will not be able to speak, but your questions will be there loud and clear in our chat. Again, let me remind you the bios of our speakers and panelists are posted in the chat and also on the website, should you wish to refer to them so that we do not waste time as we introduce the speakers. Again, thank you very much to our distinguished speakers. We will now be moving to the panel. In this regard, I would begin where we ended with our colleague, my brother, Mr. Martin Bwalia from AUDA NEPAD, who is the acting director of the Knowledge Management Program Evaluation and Centers of Excellence at the AUDA NEPAD. And Martin, if you would kindly put on your camera, we know that it is not new, the issue of human capital development, climate, food, energy nexus. These we know to be ingredients in Africa's development in transforming our food systems. But the question really is why now? And what is compelling? What are the priorities that are so compelling to our wide stakeholder group that we should be bringing it up at this time, and touch a little bit on some of the key priorities and maybe what you're doing at NEPAD in this regard. Mr. Bwalia, please.
Thank you so much, and good morning, good afternoon. I hope you can hear me well.
Loud and clear, we can hear you.
Thank you. Yeah, let me start by saying, as you mentioned, that yes, these are not new issues in Africa's development conversations. And in fact, when you speak to people in the grassroots, on the streets, in the general public, they even wonder many times, what are you talking about? Because this is what you've been talking about ever, kind of. But we need to come back to these issues in Africa, because as also we just heard from our principals, the distinguished guests, these issues remain illusions, dreams, and even a source of frustrations for still significant portion of our continent. And therefore, we can't just ignore them. And in fact, we need to come back to them, but of course, not just as a discussion. And I think we also, you can pick apart from our distinguished guests' statements, this is not coming back to these issues just to acknowledge the importance, but this is coming back to these issues saying we need to action, we need implementation, and we actually need implementation that delivers results and impact. And this, in fact, like I said, is when the general populations begin to feel the difference, then we know that we're doing something and we have to do something with them. I'll come back to that point. But we do know that we have, for instance, as mentioned, we have the SDG, we have Agenda Principle 3, we have the CADAP Malabo, and more recently the UN Food Systems Summit Outcomes. We have the MDCs on climate, and there are several others. So actually during the UN Food Systems, the member states made it clear that just another list will not make a difference. And this is why the dialogue, especially in Africa, gravitated more towards how do we make happen what we know needs to be done? Or indeed, what is it that, why is it what we know is important, is a priority, is not happening at scale, at speed, as desired by everybody? And that's what we say all the time we get into these sessions. This is why, as we talk today, and you heard also from our CEO, the issue is how do these dialogues in this form directly galvanize implementation, galvanize action, and as actually mentioned, there are some things that are happening and happening very well. How do we learn from that so that we can then drive results at scale and in a very sustainable way that is impacting on our people's lives? We do know that COVID-19, the peace and security conflicts that we're experiencing now, and various other disruptions, including, for instance, desert locusts in the Horn of Africa, these are not the sources of the problem. They have come to underline, in fact, the agency and the imperativeness of action to resolve very fundamental issues that are actually related to human well-being, related to, if you come into Human Development Index, actually for Africa is very basic things, is access to water, access to energy, education, health, shelter. And these are things that when you talk about, and I'm going to conclude in a moment, when you talk about food systems, and again, why we have gone to talk about systems approaches is because underlining that sector solutions have not worked. And our distinguished guest made it very clear that we need integrated, we need coordinated, is because in Africa we have 5-6 decades of sector solutions. And it's very clear they have not worked. It's not just agriculture. Actually, we have seen in the COVID, the impact on food systems, on food security is impacting on education, on healthcare, on energy, and the other way around. So how do we get to those solutions that will enable us to deliver at scale, systemically, and also building capabilities at all levels? And my last point here is that, and I'll come back to it, is that one thing we have recognized as a critical factor in sustainable, comprehensive solutions is the participation of the population. They are not just beneficiaries waiting for solutions from us. They are actually integral part of the solution. And if we can learn in our interventions to actually bring in the populations as part of the solution, then we're going to find that some of the things we are grappling with may have actually homegrown solutions out there. Because in the front line, in fact, there are no sectors. They are only the solutions, and they are very integrated inherently And this is what we need to do in terms of bringing up that. And this front line is public sector, is private sector, is civil society, is actually very many of those people that would understand when you talk about food insecurity. They are living with it. Let me stop here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Martin, for those insights, always reminding us, especially to involve our member states, actually root the solutions from listening to our member states and from learning what they're doing. I know you reminded that throughout our discussions and our lead up to a common position on Africa on food systems last year. Thank you so much for your contribution. And we'll be coming back to you to answer some of the questions that will be coming up. Let me now turn to a representative of one of our member states, Ms. Julie Chilombo, who is the Deputy Coordinator of the Coordination of External Resources and Monitoring Projects in the Presidency of the Democratic Republic of Congo. Ms. Chilombo, if you could please share with us the perspective of DRC on the implementation of the Africa position on food systems. We understand you're making a lot of progress there. What some of the challenges and achievements, I should start with achievements and challenges, especially looking at the issue of human capital development and also some of the interlinkages of energy infrastructure and climate with regards to food system. Ms. Chilombo, please.
Okay, thank you. And if you would allow me to continue in French. Okay, so merci pour la parole.
Thank you very much for giving me the floor. When it comes to health and education, these are vital indicators of development of human capital. They condition productivity amongst people when they're working, and therefore inclusive economic development, which is sustainable both for a community or a nation. In RDC, we have a high and generalized poverty rate. 27% of our people suffer from food insecurity of an acute order, more than 5 million children amongst them, and there is uncertain access to social basic infrastructure, drinking water, electricity, housing, healthcare, and education. And the human capital development index is very low. With the uncertainty affecting basic infrastructure and the major increase in population, local food production is insufficient. It's not very varied. There's not a high degree of processing when it comes to value change. Access is difficult, and the DRC finds that it's largely dependent on imports, about $1.5 billion US dollars per annum there. And these are of frozen or tin products of low quality and not necessarily products that local people can afford or even get to. And this means that there is a nutrition problem. Food systems are basically subsistence ones. When it comes to energy, despite a great potential, the infrastructure of the country is very low. Electricity reaches fewer than 15% of the population, and 10% indeed is concentrated essentially in the major towns. The energy shortfall is a challenge for production, development of value change, and also the preparation and conservation of food. On these 2 points, food security and energy, the government is attempting to inject new life into a vast renewable energy and infrastructure projects to start up agro-industry, and it's also in full force of implementation of an emergency community development program throughout 145 areas in the DRC, this over 2 years, looking at drilling micro or mini electric power stations, the construction and rehabilitation of agricultural access roads, the involvement of agricultural households and smallholders, the majority majority of our population. The government has undertaken to produce seeds and to provide training in production tools to increase production and productivity and the quality of locally grown food, and to develop local infrastructure to ensure that there is a market dynamic and that wealth can be promoted in the rural areas. It's a question of increasing best practices and fighting food insecurity. We also want to see that we can ensure lasting use of our reservation, of our land, halt deforestation and other practices which disturb the ecosystem. So just to come back to what Martin also stated, the government has just launched our emergency local development program. This is a 2-year program looking at local people, and it involves drilling for water, as I said, electric power stations, and we are improving access to internal markets and helping smallholders, because these are the majority of our population. By means of science and technology, the government has also undertaken to provide seeds to help our farmers and to train them to increase production and productivity and the quality of locally produced food. Our national programs of food and nutritional security wish to improve our resilience given shocks and crises. So to conclude, we have not been immune from climate change events, and we've seen the Congo is the lung of the planet. It can be a flagship example, looking at our resources and our potential, which can help not just Africa, but the entire world. So I should like to thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Chilombo, for those very important words coming from our member states. Thank you for highlighting some of the programs that are being made by the Democratic Republic of Congo to address the challenges that you highlight. I also want to congratulate you on the development of a new land policy, which I think will help to harness what you're saying in terms of harnessing some of your lands for investment, but also as a conduit to addressing climate change. Thank you very much. Okay. We will now move on to our next speaker. Our next speaker is going to provide a perspective from private sector, Mr. Nana Osei-Bonsu, who is the Chief Executive Officer of Private Enterprises Federation in Ghana. And if I might turn to you, Mr. Osei-Bonsu, I want us to address what the most important tools are in addressing the challenges of climate, the erosion of African agriculture or deteriorating status there, and the challenge that we have with continuous food in Africa, and how we might be able to address this, especially in terms of looking at reducing the waste that we have in Africa. I know we have a lot of waste when it comes to harvest. The challenges might be from the consumption side for our developed countries. And I want you to address that, especially based on the private sector perspective. Thank you, Mr. Osei-Bonsu, please.
Thank you very much, Madam Moderator Joanne, and Your Excellencies, all protocols observed. Whoever put this agenda together
can you hear? I just want to ask our interpreters if you can hear, and just to highlight that we have interpretation in case you want to also hear that.
Yeah, do they hear me?
Interpreters can hear you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. What I'm saying is that whoever put the agenda together in the sequence, human development, capital development, climate change, energy, and then our food systems. Could have done a better job than this, because they follow. If you don't understand the systems, if you don't understand what is going on in the arena, you cannot prescribe the solutions. And as you indicated, there are a lot of problems with African agriculture, some of our own creation, others by others, which no fault of ours. And then we also sit and wait and expect the other side of the coin to provide the resources for the business people to invest. What I think that today's dialogue forum, and this is the second part that I've been a part of, is to find solutions. Solutions are a plethora of issues and challenges on having the technical skills and competencies to analyze and make decisions, the right decisions to invest. Without investment, the business person is sitting idle. But businesses go to where they have opportunity for returns and where the returns are guaranteed. But in Africa, agriculture is so precarious that nobody wants to invest because there's no de-risking mechanism to support us. And so the African is sitting on the sidelines. But 1 trillion agriculture alone, which is going to be 1 trillion in 2030, definitely needs Africans to invest in. We have the market, we have the population, we have the young people who can take over the future. So the solutions as we talk today in the dialogue discussions is to find avenues where we stop the hemorrhage of agriculture. We are in a climate condition where God has given us good food in the range. God cultivated food. We didn't grow it, but we do not include that in our food security accountability. The forestry, we do not include that in our accountability. The mineral resources, we don't. So when we're talking about being deprived of resources to finance agriculture engagement or value addition, we are our own worst enemies, because we have these things that we can piggyback and create opportunity and the financial schemes that will allow us to invest in African agriculture. Madam Moderator, you talked about most of them, by God given food in the range, is going to waste. Nobody's going to collect them and add value. And if you're going to add value, the cost of energy alone is going to be prohibitive. One side of Africa paying 2 cents per kilowatt hour, others are paying 47 cents per kilowatt hour. The business person, I say, always go to where the bacon is ready to be eaten. And so we are deprived of the opportunity to reinvest or to invest in our own backyard because of the absence of financial intermediation. But we can create those. The others created that. Why can't we? The others leverage their resources to do. We have those that are itemized, the mineral resources, the tree crops, and others. But the climate impact on agriculture cannot be disregarded. Whilst we are sitting idle through no fault of ours, those using charcoal, the crisscrossing of jet airplanes around, depleting the ozone layer that are affecting agriculture use. The smallholder farmer, no matter what they do, cannot get the returns. So in this dialogue forum, I think we should turn the conversation into business opportunities, actionable plans. What can we do? Incentivize affirmative action. 3 letters, 3 words. Incentivize affirmative action. You incentivize the private sector. If you go left and you don't have the resources, we will support you. We give you this in return. Affirmative action is concrete, actionable plan that we're going to do on the standards. The business person is promised a return of X once you encourage the Y. And then the action is on the ground, as Martin indicated. Our populists are waiting for us. They've been waiting forever, almost. No action. We've been talking, and we keep talking. And the answers are only on the platform. How many people get to know about it? But we need to take action from now. I think the next series should not be, dialogue series, but actionable series. And we have to have accountability and monitoring of what and where we came from and what we have achieved. So, Madam Moderator, to me, representing the private sector, the resiliency in agriculture is coming from us, promising, providing the risk mechanism, providing the resources through our own. As I said, we have the resources to engage, to create a financial muscle that will allow businesses to invest in Africa, because nobody else is going to invest in Africa. And those people who hold custody of our 1 trillion agriculture are not going to relinquish that to us on a silver platter, unless we take the bull by the horns. The climate change impact is dwindling our use. Is that true for any fault of ours? No. The jet planes that are flying all over and polluting the air. How have we and I'm asking the ECA to help us to do an equivalent calculation of the cost of those pollution on agriculture. So, Madam Moderator, this is my piece of advice, that let's get action, because my private businesses, they want action. They want something on the ground. Thank you very much. I'm privileged to be a part of this.
Well, thank you. And thank you for always bringing your passion in helping us look for solutions that touch on private sector and converting those lemons into lemonade in terms of opportunities. Thank you so much for your intervention. And we'll be again looking at some of those from the floor, getting some reaction from some of your proposals. We now will move to listen to how we can be inclusive food systems, inclusive in terms of the opportunities that we provide. From Mrs. Veda Simpson, the founder and chief executive officer of QuidEU Inc. Help us here in looking at how we can empower women in the agro-processing sector in order to take advantage as we develop our value chains, as we develop agro-processing and add value to our products. Women are an important area in this regard. They are the ones who have been the foundation of our processing. How can we enhance that contribution? Mrs. Veda Simpson, please. Mrs. Veda Simpson.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Hello, can you hear me? Wonderful. Thank you so much. It indeed is an honor and a pleasure to have been invited to serve as panelist for this Africa Dialogue Series 22. Of course, the sub-theme of this webinar is Human Capital Development, Climate, Energy, and Food Systems in Africa. So, I thank African Union Development Agency, EPAC, UN Economic Commission for Africa, UNICA, and of course, Office of Special Advisor on Africa, OSAA. It's a wonderful opportunity. And it's a way to discuss tangible ways to address nutritional needs on the continent. My name is Veda. I'm the CEO of QuidEU Incorporated, and we're an agro-processor based out of Liberia. SME, but an agro-processor. We're focused on production of juices, specifically ginger beer. Non-alcoholic ginger beer is a traditional drink in Liberia, and also cashews. We pivoted to drinks versus the cashews because there were serious challenges, market forces in terms of cashew production, and I will address that. We're also working very closely with another woman-owned business, Jola House. We join forces because we see there are synergies there, empowering women in business to drive Nigeria's economy and to address nutrition. And this is an example that I would like to speak to for the that I have. Can you hear me? I keep hearing disturbances in the background. Can you hear me okay? Hello? Dan, can you hear me okay? Hello?
Yes,
okay.
Please continue.
I'd like to just go ahead and discuss what we can do in bringing. Hello?
Speed up a little bit. Let me turn off your. I think we should
like
turn
to
off your video.
Discuss how we can go about really addressing address challenges, bringing women into the sector, into the agro-processing sector. The biggest challenge, in my view, working in that sector is having baseline data and gathering baseline data, that is working with local sources, domestic experts, in order to gather the information needed for us to be able to target those areas. Okay, so some of the experiences we've had in terms of interventions is bringing in interventions from overseas and areas not. My apologies, but the feedback is really incredible on my line, and I'm having some technical difficulties in being able to move forward. Can you hear me? Okay.
We can hear you. You might want to try turning off your video to see if we can improve the reception.
Recording stopped.
So some of the challenges. So what we see as one of the ways
recording has stopped.
What we see is
recording in
with
progress.
Women in academia in particular.
This meeting is being recorded.
Proceed. We stopped your video here. Please proceed, Vito. Thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you much better now.
Can you hear me okay now?
We want your video though. Thank you. I'm going to stop your video. Just keep talking. Thank you.
So what we need to do to work with women in these interventions, that is working with academics, with universities. This is somewhat non-traditional because typically in Africa, we see that researchers and a lot of the baseline data come from overseas, or we have individuals who are working in other African countries. And yes, it is on the continent, but in order to address issues in certain countries, each country needs to have its own specific intervention. And so from prior experience, I believe that this would be an excellent approach. Working with women's studies programs, working with departments of agriculture within specific countries, respective countries. So if you're doing an intervention in Liberia, for example, you would want to work with the universities, the community colleges, those local domestic systems that are in country in order to implement. This is crucial and this is key. And I think this is something that we miss throughout the continent. And this is challenge in terms of interventions internationally. Okay. Another way of moving forward in terms of interventions and bringing women on board, especially when you're talking about co-ops and women working in on the farm, working out of the cities, you want to provide technical assistance. You want to provide training that makes sense, but training that is also available to them on their time. When I worked with the Angie Brooks International Center, we had a program in the central part of Liberia where we worked with women farmers at the end of the day. We would target at the end of the day, they would come into the Madam Swakoko Center and work with them, educating them on various aspects of running their own small businesses, if you will. And this is how you target, be very, very intentional and very specific. And I know we're talking broad themes. This is indeed a high level, but I think sometimes it's good to go further down, to drill down to what's happening on the ground in order to inform policy documents so that we don't miss, sometimes we don't miss the detail that is so important to moving the ball forward. So these are some of the ways I believe we can bring women in, not just academia, not just quote unquote intellectuals, but working with women who are in the rural areas. Another challenge that we see in terms of addressing these issues, specifically human development, once again, talking about training, is also in terms of connecting rural women with women in the cities and connecting rural women with women who run small businesses like mine, for example. Sometimes we operate in silos and instead of being collaborative in efforts, many of the other speakers have talked about integrating systems, but I'm talking more on the micro level, if you will, that we bring in programs that structure a way for women businesses who are in the cities to work with rural women. In terms of the business that I have, Ginger Anana, we have pineapple and ginger, etc. There are women in the rural areas that are growing these products. How do we connect businesses in the cities that are looking to package and export with rural women so that we have that continuum, so we're able to empower each other, and even more importantly, so that we expand growing food so that we can feed ourselves. It really struck me when I heard my fellow panelists out of DRC talking about the challenges in DRC and how much food is imported into DRC, one of the richest nations in the world. It's shocking, but those are the same challenges we faced in West Africa, in Liberia specifically. There's rain in Liberia 6 months out of the year. Why are we importing orange juice? Why are we importing pineapple juice? To me, it's unconscionable. We have the resources on the continent. We simply need to look inward and be able to source those. You know, I talked a little bit about what I was doing about cashews. There are large organizations throughout the world that are sourcing products like cashews, almonds, and being able to deliver it to the West. But then what that does is that they pay the local growers in West Africa not that much. They get most of the benefits because they're processing, and all we're doing is farming these products. I know Cote d'Ivoire a few years ago had a push towards processing cashews and processing nuts, etc. But some of the larger industries out there were able to shut it down simply by coming into those countries and opening up their own factories, so that yes, the products are being grown and processed in Cote d'Ivoire, but it's still, you know, the value chain is still being tied to that larger company in Asia or in the sub-region. So I know we had 5 minutes, and I hope I haven't gone overboard. My apologies for the technical difficulties. But women are over 50% of the population in certain African nations, certainly 50%. We need to empower the other half of the nation in order for the nation to move forward. We need to empower our women so our women can work with our men so that Africa becomes the powerhouse that we know it can be. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Ms. Simpson, and our apologies as well. We are glad we did not lose you totally. That important intervention, we were able to fix it, and we are glad to hear some of what you're bringing out. I think it's really important to talk the role of our centers of excellence in terms of producing the data that is needed to be able to guide interventions, evidence-based interventions, whether it is in policy or capacity development, the issues of empowerment of women from production to processing to marketing. Thank you for those great interventions. We'll be looking at those again in the chat as we look at the questions that are coming through, and that is coming through fast. We now move on to Mr. Andrea Renzulli, the Senior Manager for Rest for Africa Foundation, who is going to help us examine the issue of sustainable energy, electricity. We heard the importance of energy in ensuring that our value chains are robust and vibrant in terms of innovations that are needed. And here we are going to be listening to you, and if you can just help us to look at how the agri-food systems would benefit from the various elements in terms of innovations in energy production and energy and electricity. Thank you so much. Mr. Renzulli, please.
Thank you very much, Rona. I hope you can hear me well. Thank you very much for inviting Rest for Africa to this webinar on a very important question. And please, before answering to the question, let me just start by briefly introducing Rest for Africa Foundation, which is a member-driven foundation that has been founded in 2012 by a group of European industrial players active on the renewable energy value chain. Rest for Africa is today celebrating its 10 years anniversary since the beginning of its activities, working towards its mission to facilitate the creation of an enabling environment for scaling up investments in clean energy technologies. So coming back to your question, how advancing sustainable electricity access, in our view, can have a transformative impact on Africa's food system and contributing in ensuring actually access to food. Well, I think it's widely acknowledged today that electricity access has an overall transformational impact on development outcomes, as energy acts as a fundamental enabler for kickstarting virtuous cycles of socioeconomic development. In fact, universal access to affordable, reliable, and sustainable electricity is crucial for Africa's future, as recognized by the SDG 7, because electrification not only plays a direct role in sustaining the well-being of communities, but also enables an increase in the value added of the agricultural, the industrial, and the service sectors, and increase economic outputs. Moreover, electricity, of course, is today the energy carrier that has the lowest carbon footprint, thanks to the development and the emergence of renewable technologies, which are becoming, and in some places, in some countries already are, the cheapest available technology for its generation. But how we can work and how we can find new business models, new strategies that can support the development of renewable technologies, and then through the development of renewable technologies can also support the overall socioeconomic development of the African continent. Well, in the past years, Rest for Africa worked on assessing and evaluating the benefits and potential of business models to advance, of course, sustainable electricity access in Africa. We mainly focused on evaluating the socioeconomic and financial sustainability of integrated models, such as the water energy food nexus, developing several studies to demonstrate their viability and their impact. And I really invite all the participants today to look at our website to find more in-depth information about it. So what is the Web Nexus in our view? It's an holistic, multi-sectorial approach that helps and enables the provision of access to services and resources that are essential for sustainable human development. And in fact, ensuring access to clean water, to modern and non-pollutant energy service, and to adequate food is at the heart of the fight against global poverty and is key for achieving sustainable development goals. So Rest for Africa, through its analysis, found out that integrated projects bring about greater development impact on local communities than the sole energy provision, and can also bring better financial performance for investors. We also found out that actually integrated approach are not a recent idea, but they're already been implemented in Africa since the 80s, since the end of the 80s and the 90s, in rural communities by NGOs, by developers, by other organizations that are present already in Africa and have shown actually the benefits that they can bring and how those projects actually can help you maximize local impact on the communities. Well, the Web Nexus projects, thanks to this integrated multi-sectorial approach to service provision, will contribute to the expansion of agricultural production, to the economic activities of local communities, to agri-food production cycles. For example, providing the needed energy to support farming, to support poultry, to support fishing value chains development, and create this economic added value on local communities. Energy will actually enable cold chain, will actually enable the storage, and we have heard about what is the waste problem of the food production currently in many geographies in Africa. Web Nexus projects also integrating this energy, water, and food service provision help to deliver on Africa's unmet energy needs. And we are all aware about the energy access gap that is currently, that Africa is currently suffering, and supporting the development of cost-competitive local renewable energy resources that can create customers out of beneficiaries and catalyze the takeoff of new markets while also reducing emissions. Web Nexus projects can also enable productivity improvements across sectors impacting economic activities. And finally, they also can enhance resources and operational efficiencies across value chains by optimizing primary resources consumptions, but also minimize waste and reduce imports. Another very important element that we found out about the benefits and the advantages of the Water Energy Food Nexus projects is that building projects and services around productive uses of energy and leverage on the synergies and the positive cross-sectorial reasoning and strategy that are enabled by the Web Nexus can also support project developers in attracting finance towards project implementation. And access to finance, we heard from our other distinguished panel, is one of the major challenges that private actors faces in implementing projects across the African different geographies. So in this regard, what we observe is that today, the more a developer is able to prove the positive impact of its business model, both in terms of economic viability, but also in terms of the positive socioeconomic impact that it can achieve through its project on the ground, the more the developer increases its ability in accessing finance at competitive and attractive conditions. And this is reflected actually by the development of impact finance, of sustainability finance that we have seen in the market during the past years, and that has been booming, especially during the COVID-19 pandemic. So RES for Africa today, to demonstrate and continue to advocate for the benefits of the Water Energy Food Nexus approach, is currently collaborating with GIZ on their Nexus Regional Dialogue Program, focusing especially on supporting the development and implementation of WEF Nexus projects in two regions, one in the Niger Basin area and on the MENA region, to validate the impact and the potential of this kind of project on the field and sensibilize the national stakeholders on this approach. So to conclude, what we learned through our work and what we learned through the dialogue that we have been building with partners, but also especially with the members of our foundation, which come from the private sector and actually are looking to African market opportunities in this area, we understood that the WEF Nexus and the other multi-sectorial approach that are able to transform synergies between sectors in a service offer, in a value proposition, actually have the potential to redesign the rural development process in Africa and in other regions of the world, leveraging on synergies again, leveraging on partnership between actors, between energy players and non-energy players in the field of the Water Energy Food Nexus, between public and private players to optimize cost, increases financial viability of projects, and in the end, maximize local impact. We are sure that in the next future, we will see a very long and progressive growth of Water Energy Food Nexus that has to be included in the agenda of governments, in their planning and their strategies, that has to be developed in concrete action plan, because those projects have really the potential to change the game and support the development of African rural areas and the provision of basic access to fundamental resources. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you for that intervention. Really useful in helping us look at the whole issue of access to electricity and energy and how it impacts food systems. We do have one more speaker, and hopefully we will have time for a couple of questions. Let me encourage you to post your questions in the chat. And let me now introduce Richard Tull of UNHCR. The beauty of belonging to the UN family is the diversity of dimensions that we look at this question, because it is relevant. So just help us to understand how you see the major challenges for the millions of forcibly displaced persons in Africa in dealing with the nexus of climate change, energy, and food systems in Africa. Please, Mr. Tull.
Thank you very, very much. Good morning, good afternoon to those of you who are part of this very important discussion. Thank you very much, particularly to Cristina Duarte and her team for organizing this Africa Dialogue series. It is a very important Africa-owned opportunity to look at issues of concern, but also opportunities. And also thank you for the opportunity for being able to give voice to the millions of dispossessed and displaced people in the African continent today, because as we look at the challenges faced, the strong headwinds of climate change and COVID and food and energy insecurity exacerbated by supply chains from the Ukraine and the Russian conflict, the situation for already marginalized and vulnerable people has become considerably worse. And if I may just make a few remarks about that and then move to a few concrete areas where we as an organization think the focus needs to lie. First of all, we are facing a perfect storm of elements that are conspiring to create even more human insecurity than there was before the Ukraine crisis erupted. This is sapping human capital and draining human dignity. For refugees already facing the prospect of months, sometimes years from their lands and homes, the erosion of their disempowerment, the erosion of their rights and entitlements is profoundly disempowering for them as people and as communities. It's difficult to comprehend the scale of the challenges that are faced. Our High Commissioner issued a very stark warning yesterday, indicating that for the first time ever, the numbers of forced displaced people around the planet has exceeded 100 million people. That's one out of every 100 people around the world faces severe dislocation and displacement. And of course, Africa and the African continent has been more severely damaged and hurt by the phenomenon of displacement than most other parts of the world. That 80% of that population are women and children, already facing vulnerabilities, and these vulnerabilities of displacement are exacerbated. And 90% of those populations that are displaced are living in countries and societies that are already challenged through socioeconomic shortages and difficulties of their own, often living on border areas and marginalized from the mainstream of societies. And one only has to look at the extraordinary figures of vulnerability in the Horn of Africa today. The drought that hasn't been seen on a scale in 40 years places more than 20 million people in extreme food insecurity context. So where do we take some of these very grim figures and statistics in this important discussion today? The first point, and we've heard it already, and I would simply like to emphasize it again, is that we need people-centric approaches and we need participatory approaches. We can no longer afford the luxury of designing programs, raising funds and having frameworks that do not place people, ordinary people, at the center of everything that we do and we think. This lies, as it does, at the heart of the Sustainable Development Goals, because the mantra there is leave no one behind. But we must take that seriously. If we are truly to raise the human and social and economic and political capital of countries, we must make sure that all groups are brought up at the same time. The rising tide must raise all boats, not just those who are already privileged in many senses. So the first point I really wanted to say is that in all of our efforts of designing collaborative frameworks at a global or regional or sub-regional level, they must place participation of everybody at the heart of it, and particularly women, the voices of women in active participation, not in lip service terms, but in active participation, so that they can shape the destinies and directions of strategies and plans is extremely important, and harness the power that they will always bring to these kinds of endeavors. The second is that making sure that displaced people are also brought into that. We cannot afford to have 100 million people around the planet cast to the margins of society. This is extremely corrosive to their own sense of community survival, but it is also extremely corrosive and damaging to state and national security. Large numbers of human insecure people on border areas and within societies destabilizes societies. So once again, these are problems that we can no longer afford to ignore. Social protection of health, education, work, and meaningful livelihoods. These are issues that have popped up in discussions already this morning. Very, very important that displaced people are brought into participation and included in whatever national or other endeavors are being undertaken. And last but not least, the tapping into the community strength. The answers of resilience lie in the communities themselves. Too often in the past, we've designed programs, we've raised funds that take for granted that beneficiaries know and should be grateful for what is being received. We need to harness the human capital that resides in the communities to make sure that they are the master of their own destinies, and that their capital is released. In its own small way, UNHCR is trying to address these things. For example, in Cameroon and Ethiopia, we've got some very active forestation programs. In the Chad, we're investing in solar energy, precisely at the community level, to unleash human capital, provide income generation, but also to hold and bring communities together so that they have a meaningful sense of social cohesion within their communities. Because without that, they can become prey to other disintegrating forces and can become exploited by others, including the rise of extremism in parts of the world, which is deeply disturbing. So the challenge is ahead of us. Integration and participation must remain at the center of everything that we do. And we hope and we count on the support of these tremendously vital regional institutions to provide leadership on how to make sure that the world's most disadvantaged and disenfranchised people remain at the center and deeply included in our endeavors. So thank you very much. I look forward to questions, and it's a great privilege to be amongst you today. Thank you. Back to you, Joan.
Thank you, Richard, for that wonderful intervention. We did some work on the issue of conflict and how it affects agriculture. And one MP from Somalia pointed out that Somalia is one of the most agriculturally productive countries with rivers and a lot of potential, but highly underutilized because of the issue of conflict for so many years. So on the one hand, you have the displaced persons, but you also have these areas of conflict that actually can be breadbaskets for the rest of the continent. So this is a very important issue as well. I thank you for that intervention, even as you move forward to looking at solutions that integrate, that are people-centered, as you mentioned here, so that they are more inclusive of all the constituents affected. It is now time to examine some of the questions that have been raised. And as I mentioned, I have persons my colleagues who are supporting me in this regard, Ben, Judith. I wonder if you have any questions. I did see one question, but it really touched on the core of what we are discussing. So Judith, if you can raise that question so that it can stimulate some responses from some of our panelists. I know it's one they have been responding to, but I think it comes from a point of frustration. I think our panel, one of our participants, Agnes Harrison, asked a question, I think, that touches on the frustration that we've had in terms of talk. I think we've had a lot of our panelists and no action. Judith, can you take the floor and ask that question for us?
Okay. Thank you, Joan. I think you have actually alluded to the question. The question does ask, we have been having these kind of discussions. We have had, the declarations, Malabo, we have had the kind of framework, but we still hear a lot about food insecurity. So what is it that we are going to do differently from this talk, or what will this discussion, the dialogue, yield, so that we don't hear a lot more about food insecurity in Africa? Yeah, that is a question from Agnes Harrison, and it gives us a food for thought that we shouldn't just talk like we've always done. Thank you.
Thank you. I mentioned that it comes out of frustration for many in terms of we've discussed these issues before. What is going to be done differently? And I think what I would do is invite some of our panelists to speak to what they see as something that can be done differently, especially taking inspiration from the food systems momentum, that momentum from the summit, from the consultations. I don't know, Martin, what have you heard from the ground in terms of what we can do differently? Martin Balia, are you with us?
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, definitely. And this is the conversation that from the African Union Development Agency we're talking about in terms of how to make it happen. And there are actually some clear levers within the continent, especially, like I said earlier, in the front line of implementation that are pointing to not just solutions, but solutions at scale and working at systemic levels. And let me just mention two or three. One is, like I said, the issue of harnessing the populations as part of the solution. The program that our CEO referred to on the youth and also the program on food systems are actually pointing to that and emphasizing the capacities at the front line at grassroots level in terms of really sustainable solutions. We know today in the continent and probably globally, the whole advent of technology, and I'm talking about things like digitalization, biotechnology, and especially on digitalization and the issues of knowledge, of information, of science, of awareness, those becomes important and actually can catalyze and leapfrog the continent's economic growth and development pathways. We also are looking at and considering as one area where we can draw a lot of energy is that, and I mentioned to also the principals mentioned, how do we move outside sector solutions? The whole UN food systems last year was about systems approaches. But we know when you come into the countries that we are organized around sectors. And probably to venture to say, let's reorganize those things would be a tall order. But how to generate working systems that allow cross-sectorial delivery capabilities and connections where Ministry of Energy recognizes that the success in Ministry of Agriculture is just as their success as that of agriculture. So in our programs in the African Development Agency, we are looking at those cross-ministerial, interministerial working arrangements, some of them which already exist, but how do we catalyze them, how do we energize them and enhance capacity for their functioning to actually deliver at that systemic level in systems approaches. Let me pause here.
Thank you, Martin, for pointing those out. I see one of our panelists, Veda Simpson, would also want to make an intervention and do address what we are bringing to the table as well. What are our constituents, those that we represent, what will they be doing moving forward as well? Ms. Simpson, please.
Yes, I'd like to address the question about what can we do differently in terms of agriculture, agro-processing. I'd like to suggest that Africa take another look at organic options, organic interventions for fertilization, for pest prevention, and also renewable resources for energy in the production of food. Joanne, did you hear that?
Yes, I heard you. I was wondering whether you are done with your intervention. Are you done?
Oh, okay. So just very brief. Those are my comments.
Okay, thank you very much. In terms of adding value addition, I think the element of value addition is extremely important. and some of what you spoke to before as well in terms of empowerment of women. I would invite Mr. Nana Osebonsu to make an intervention here, building on what you already said, but bring in what would the private sector do differently, or what do we require to do to build that enabling environment for their participation? Thank you.
Thank you, Joanne. I think my other panelists mentioned the resource of energy, the renewable energy, which will lower the cost of production. When I was speaking, I talked about the food waste in the grains, the food in the natural state. If we are able to do differently, bring the food, add value, preservation, and storage, these are things that we don't have. But the private sector, as I said, can be incentivized to play a partnership arrangement with government to set up the storage facilities, the capacity building, the value addition, and the preservation. Some of our foods are nutritious foods, what we now call forgotten foods, that our ancestors used to do. We have all shielded that because of the fact that the imports are dwarfing these things. So to do differently, let's go restructure the forgotten foods, the nutritious foods of our ancestors, and then add value to them to increase the shelf life, provide the resources to prevent decay, to prevent waste, and I think we can address the system that we call food system or food security. Because when we talk about food security, we're only counting on man-made, not God-given. So we should be able to include those, and definitely that would make us food secure for the generations to come. Thank you.
Thank you for that intervention. I do see another question from Anderson Chikalibo. Ben, do you want to read that question, or do you want me to go ahead?
I think you can go ahead. You can go ahead so that we don't waste time.
Okay.
Please go ahead.
So at least I have seen it this time. So Anderson Chikalibo mentions that we have amazing development-related policies and frameworks, but implementation of such has been a challenge due partly to lack of resources, such as adequate financing, among others. How do we ensure that there are adequate resources in promoting food, nutrition, and sustainable energy, amongst others? Who amongst our panelists would want to take the floor on that? We had a colleague who spoke to the issue of energy, Mr. Andrea Renzulli, but we also have excellent speakers who spoke to that issue as well. Let me know if you want to take the floor.
So, thank you,
Mr.
Joanna.
Renzulli, do you want to take the floor before I give the floor to Nana? Yeah.
I can try to give 2 minutes answer to the question. I think that what we have seen also is that finance is available, but the accessibility of that capital is most of the time challenging. This is mainly for one reason, is that the cost of that finance is still too high for many investors in order to make projects viable and profitable for them. So one way of increasing actually finance accessibility for the developers is to work on creating this enabling environment, this enabling condition that is required to decrease the perception of risks of investing in African countries, in African geographies, increase the access to this capital, and then foster project development. So I think that working on these enabling conditions, that can be policies and regulation, that can be incentives, that can be implementable actions plan that provide clear market signal also to potential investor, will play a fundamental role in improving accessibility to capital from the developers. Thank you.
Oh, thank you for that intervention. I think targeted at enabling the environment that brings the private sector to see that there is profits to be made, so that they can, and reducing that transaction cost for them to be able to make the investments and innovations. Nana, 1 minute.
Thank you, Joanne. the point I made earlier was de-risking the entire investment, because usually we de-risk the financial institutions' exposure to agriculture, but not the proprietor or the promoter of the event, the smallholder farmer. So when he fails, he goes home forever. There's no opportunity. The bank can rekindle and then come back. So the incentivize that I talked about, affirmative incentive action, is to make sure the enabling environment is promoting the promoter and promoting the smallholder business, so that the banks and the insurance that are the risking will be able to go to the plate and provide the resources. Because then when they come to the table, the private sector, the service providers, energy, and the technical capacities can be enhanced for a profitable engagement. So these are tools that most of Africans don't use. We only go for the credit. If it's not there, forget about it. But we sure can make a different, innovative approach of de-risking and guarantees that allow the smallholder farmer in a value chain approach to be able to participate and save our environment. Thank you.
Thank you for that reminder to engage our financial institutions in reducing the risks. This has been tried, tested, and succeeded. And we know that there is a lot of potential here in terms of de-risking, and also including putting smallholder producers and participants on the value chain at the center of the interventions that we bring, with some innovative models that include both large, medium, and especially small, who constitutes the majority of our producers in agriculture. If you allow me, I will stop here. And I want to thank especially our interpreters who have given us extra time to be able to take those questions that we have taken. I also want to thank all of you for, especially our panelists. I'm sure all of you would agree that the perspectives that they have brought have helped us to move from the challenges, discussion of challenges only, to looking at solutions from the perspective of different stakeholders, but also disciplines that come to fore. If you allow me now to introduce Her Excellency Ambassador Fatima Kyari Mohammed, who is the Africa Union Permanent Observer Mission to the United Nations, to help us close this discussion, the Africa Development Series that has been discussing issues, human capital development, climate, energy, and food systems. Ambassador, please do welcome. Is she with us?
Please upgrade the ambassador. She was in the room.
Okay, just give it 1 minute. Let's see.
It is AU mission.
Yes, it is the AU mission. Please go ahead if she is here. Ambassador Fatima Kyari Mohammed, or a representative.
I can see her in the list. She's AU mission. Please, the host, to upgrade her.
Good morning.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Your Excellency. Please take the floor.
Wonderful. For some reason, I'm not able to put on my camera, but I will continue. Okay, perfect. Now it's working. Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you so much, Madam Chair. It's been a very, very interesting morning. I was able to follow the entire discussions. And it's truly an honor for me to be with you this morning to provide a few remarks in the closing. First of all, let me just say it's great that we've gotten to the fourth webinar of this year's Africa Dialogue series. And I wish to really sincerely thank everyone that has been part of this. Particularly, I would like to take this opportunity to welcome and congratulate Madame Nardos Bekele Thomas, my dear sister, on assuming her duties as the Chief Executive Officer of the African Union Development Agency, AUDA, and NEPAD. And as you all know, this is instrumental in the implementation of priority regional and continental projects and the promotion of regional integration towards the realization of our continental agenda. I would also like to thank Ms. Vera Songe, the Executive Secretary of UNECA, who's been instrumental in supporting the African development agenda. But in particular, I would like to thank my dear sister USG, Christina Duarte, the Special Advisor of the SG on Africa, for her incredible support and partnership with the AU, and particularly with my office, and her energy and drive towards getting this ADS to the next level and ensuring that we're having deep conversations on fundamental issues that are priorities for all of us. And it's clear that the continued collaboration and partnership between AU, UNECA, and of course OSA is critical for promoting and accelerating the implementation of both our continental and global goals. So with those introductory remarks, I would just like to say, Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, that over the past few weeks, we've had this opportunity to engage with many stakeholders across sectors, across agencies, across continents. We've been able to reflect, to exchange ideas, to even constructively criticize, but also proffer some solutions towards, and I quote, building resilience in nutrition and accelerating Africa's human capital and socioeconomic development. And drawing from the African Union's theme for the year, which is also aligned to our aspiration 1 of our development agenda 2063, and of course goal 2 of the SDGs. There's truly been cross-cutting thread, if you like, and one of the main things that I was able to pick out is the key objective of this year's ADS, which is a call to action. Action that we need to ensure that the various stakeholders, but in particular African governments at the highest level, but as well as our various institutions, the private sector, civil society, and of course the international community, to act, and I repeat, act collectively if we truly want to change the course of our current reality and accelerate the implementation of our development goals. Drawing from the various speakers and interventions, I would like to just very quickly highlight a few points that resonated with us. First, it is clear that Africa is indeed determined to transform its agricultural sector to produce sufficient food for domestic and external markets, and to restore its status as the world's net exporter of agricultural products rather than a net importer of food. And it's also clear that the realization of Africa's full agricultural potential will impact the livelihood of our populations across the board, and also address fundamental issues such as hunger and malnutrition on the continent. It's clear that our domestic market for agricultural products remains much larger than its export market, and consumer preference is in favor of local products, and growth in consumer demand for food products in terms of volume, variety, and quality could create opportunities for farmers to raise their incomes, while rural non-farming workers involved in upstream and downstream production, particularly in the distribution, processing, and retail, could generate decent incomes for our populations as well. And I'd like to just focus on the fact that agriculture will remain a trigger for our economic growth. It's a clear message that we've heard, and will also be a prime responsibility for creating jobs for our rapidly growing youthful population. And for this reason, I'd like to emphasize once again the need for us to work within the framework of the AUDA-NEPAD Comprehensive African Agricultural Development Program, which is instrumental for the alignment and harmonization of efforts in support of African agriculture and to ensure that resources, policies, and institutions get in a better position to deliver and positively impact the food system and livelihood of people on the continent. It is clear, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, that we must recognize the complexity of the current gap, the gap between the problems facing institutions and their capacity to tackle them in an integrated manner. An application of systems thinking, system solutions, needs, simultaneous application of other interventions, including, of course, culture change, continuous learning, and the ability to measure and monitor progress at all levels of the system, as well as its various pieces and within the machinery. And applying system thinking to food and nutrition is really a sophisticated approach to problem solving. And we need to think and rethink how to introduce it in our daily practices and how to best apply it considering human institutional capacities and realities on the ground. Last point I'd like to make is that the development of modern agricultural systems and increasing productivity have long been given priority in Africa, but the provision of the infrastructure, such as the rural roads, energy, irrigation, and market access, plays a vital role, and we must ensure that we focus on this in order to truly address the problem. And finally, a point that was made regarding the need for farmers in Africa to be equipped with affordable and improved seeds, extension services, training, technology packages, as well as affordable financing is critical towards increasing crop production beyond subsistence. There have been so many important messages that have been passed today and over the past few weeks, but I felt it important to just highlight some of these in my concluding remarks. And most importantly, to call on all stakeholders, including the international community and our development partners, to boost support in all of these areas, but also for us to take responsibility of our own, as I've heard being said today, in order to ensure a different future for our continent. So, Madam Chair, I would like to conclude sincerely by thanking all the panelists who've truly enriched the discussions with all their presentations and brilliant interventions. I'd like to thank you all for joining us in this event. And I sincerely hope that we will be able to take our words, convert them into action, and hopefully we'll be having a different kind of conversation in the not too distant future. I thank you all for your attention.
Thank you so much, Your Excellency. Those were excellent remarks, and we took note of all that you have added to the discussion. It wasn't just a summarization of what you had, you've actually added a lot to the discussion. I do not want to dilute those remarks that you used in your closing, but mine is just to thank Mrs. Christina Duarte and all the colleagues from OSA who have worked with us, all the colleagues that have been working with us also from AUDA-NEPAD in this planning, and also from ECA. And thanking you, Mrs. Duarte, for the leadership that you've provided throughout. Thanking my Executive Secretary and also Mrs. Nados for the leadership, and then Your Excellency, the Ambassador, as being showing a united approach in terms of our partnership with the African Union Commission, with the United Nations, AUDA-NEPAD. and to all the participants, the panelists of this session, of this important Africa Dialogue series. I want to just thank you for the interventions that you've made. I want to thank our participants, not only for listening, but also participating by asking questions. And I just want to bring this now to a close by thanking all of you and saying that we do have marching orders in terms of a call for action that we look to our leadership here to help us to advance, move that forward. And thank you so much. And this brings an end to the Africa Dialogue series. Thank you.